Unaware of what year it was, Joe wandered the streets desperate for help, but the English language had deteriorated into a hybrid of hillbilly, valley girl, inner city slang, and various grunts. Joe was able to understand them, but when he spoke in an ordinary voice, he sounded pompous and faggy to them. Idiocracy is up next on Rediscovered Movies. Hello, my name is Nomfanelo Malloy. I am your host of Rediscovered Movies, where overlooked movies, whether mainstream, independent, or somewhere in between, are discussed to be rediscovered for your viewing pleasure. Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo Malloy. I'm excited as this is the season 1 finale of the podcast, and the film that I've decided to close the season off with is Idiocracy. Idiocracy is a sci-fi comedy film that's directed and co-written by Mike Judge. The film stars Luke Wilson, Maya Rudolph, Terry Crews, and Dax Shephard. So here is the synopsis. The film starts off in 2005, where we have Joe Bowers, played by Luke Wilson. He is an average private, where he is selected to take part in a secret military experiment to put him in hibernation for a year, along with a woman named Rita, played by Maya Rudolph, who is a prostitute but tells Joe that she is a painter. As that happens, they are forgotten when the base that they're stored in is closed, and they're left in that state until 2505. And when they wake up, they discover that the average intelligence of humans has decreased so much that Joe is now the smartest person in the world. Interesting concept. So in terms of reception, it has a 74% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Here's what they have to say with the consensus. Frustratingly uneven, yet enjoyable overall, Idiocracy skewers society's devolution of an amiably goofy, yet deceptively barbed wit. Audience, however, gave it 60%. In terms of theatrical run, it made over $495,303. It opened during Labor Day weekend in September of 2006. So it did not even crack the top 10 during its opening weekend. So there's more to that story. The film is available to watch on Disney Plus and video on demand. Check your local listings. So let's start with first discoveries. So I was not aware about this movie when it came out at the time in 2006, but I used to watch a show at the time called Lip Sync Battle. And there was an episode that came out in 2016 that featured Terry Crews. During a segment, he dressed up as his character Camacho during when he was performing the song "Fight the Power" by Public Enemy. And I just because I was not aware about the character at the time, but I did a bit of research, and it turns out that's his character that he plays in the film. So I didn't watch the film at the time, but the film kind of came up when there was an article on Inverse where they talked about the oral history of the film in terms of like what happened, I guess, behind the scenes with how it was made, the marketing, and so forth. I'll put up the link for that in the description for you guys to take a look at. So I kept hearing like on social media that the film had parallels, I guess, to like the current political climate. which made me kind of like interested to check out. So I first saw the film like a few months ago on Disney Plus, and I thought, oh, like it was entertaining. I could see why, I guess at the time it originally came out, why some people didn't like it. But I also thought, yeah, like it kind of does like ring true in terms of it being like a satire like on like politics, and I guess how in a way people are behaving, but it is very, very exaggerated. And I feel like, yeah, this movie still holds up like after repeat viewing. And because of like the level of absurdity, it's really one of those films that you either gonna love it or hate it from minute one. And I say, yeah, like I do quite enjoy this movie. All right, let's go to highlights and lowlights. Let's start with the highlights. So, one of the main things that I really liked about this movie is the world building that is established, not just with 2005, but also with 2505, which is majority of the film. So, like, let's go with 2005. So, we see, like, um, with people, like, they're not, like, completely dumb, but you can see aspects of it that kind of, like, acts as, like, the introduction to that, because in the opening sequence, like, with the case study, so it focuses on the two different couples that are trying to reproduce. So we have Trevor and Carol, who is more like the uptight couple, and then we have Trish and her partner, um, where they're kind of like the hillbilly type couple, and they're able to produce multiple children, even though they're not like faithful, particularly with the husband, because he has multiple partners, which is like hilarious because there's a point that they mention, they say evolution rewards those that reproduce. Maybe that kind of like rings true, but but it's kind of like sad too though, because we should reward those that, like, you don't have to be smart necessarily, but do things that change the world for the good. So um so once like Joe and Rita are put in the hibernation pod, like we get this montage like of the decline of intelligence, which is like hilarious, like to watch, because we see like people, they become more like submissive in a way, and don't really like think for themselves and just like go with the flow, which you see like a lot during this movie. So like in a way, like it kind of does ring true to that. Like if we see like with social media, like with like cancel culture and all that stuff, we see like immediately, I'm just generalizing it, that there, let's say there's like a person, like a well-known person, that apparently either said something or was caught doing something that wasn't appropriate, and then immediately people are like, cancel this person. But then in some cases, if you like do the research, it turns out, it's not, things are not what they appear to be. But even though like that comes up, I think people still want to condemn that person. So really, like here, like we see like with facets of that being super, super, super exaggerated in terms of people trying, when people are trying to like, form their opinions. They they can't in a way, probably because of their intelligence. And also, I think also too, they just want to accept things the way they are instead of really going deep into those issues. So also to so when we go to 2505, we see it is a complete disaster. So we have, for instance, those huge piles of garbage that are like literally everywhere, which affects the air, and that leads to a lot of destruction and chaos. But in a way, it serves as an advantage when Joe tries to escape from the police. And we also have like the well known like product placement. So we have Carl's Jr. when this person tries to order from there, and then we have like the Pepsi logo during those the house rep scenes with Camacho. We have Costco, which literally has like everything. And we have Starbucks, and it's not the Starbucks right now, but this Starbucks is an adult establishment. And apparently, like, when this film came out at the time, um, apparently those companies were not particularly happy that they were mentioned in this movie, which is understandable, but it is what it is, I suppose. And one of like the companies that kind of acts as like a villain in a way is Brondo. So Brondo is essentially just like a Gatorade type, product that's a that really acts like as like a well-oiled machine, because that takes over literally everything. So they take over the FDA at one point, the FCC, and we see everywhere in the film that everything is sponsored by Brondo. And people love Brondo because it apparently has electrolytes. I mean, no surprise. But it's kind of like weird because they apparently water is replaced with Brondo, which is why in the film the crops are like literally dead, and you see where the dystopian state that people are, but yet for them I guess it's normal, but really in reality if you go outside it, like you like what the F happened here. And Brondo like sponsoring everything is just ridiculous. And there's a scene later in the film where we have Thomas Hayden Church. He cameos as CEO of Brondo. This is after like when people lose their jobs with Brondo, and after like Joe's trying to do good, which leads to his execution. So also too in terms of world building, so in terms of entertainment, we have the Ow My Balls TV show, which literally shows a person getting kicked in the balls. And there's the film called Ass, which literally shows a naked person's butt, which apparently won 8 Oscars. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah, like I'm speechless. And there's a hospital in the film called St. God's Hospital. Essentially, where like the staff, like they use these buttons with images to, I guess, to help diagnose the person. And there's a moment where like he has to put all these different tubes in different places, and one of the staff, like, he misplaces them, and like Joe kind of looks at him like sideways when he messes up. And there's also like a shot they show like these slot machines where it allows you to win free healthcare. Probably those machines like are rigged, but Yeah, it kind of like shows with that point how, like with healthcare in certain countries, they're kind of viewed as a business, which should not be the case. And another highlight that I love is the supporting characters. So I'm just highlighting select few. So we have like Dax Shephard as Frito. He's the lawyer that helps Joe and Rita. Like he is the worst lawyer ever. Like he doesn't even defend Joe like during like the trial sequence because I guess he's that upset that Joe crashes into like his place and all that stuff. But ends up, seeing the light when Joe tries to like, trick him to help him. And that leads to a whole lot of, series of events. And we also have Terry Crews. He plays the President Camacho, who was like a wrestler and ended up being president because of his high IQ. Like, I loved like his like sequence like during the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be House of Representatives, and like he pretty much says in order to fix everything, Joe is gonna fix everything because obviously he's smarter than him. But like it shows that like he doesn't want to take full like responsibility as president because clearly like we see like with that sequence the people are like upset, but I guess like with Joe like appearing like it's kind of like his way out, suppose. And we have also too Andrew Wilson. He does a cameo as Brief Supreme, who essentially like executes people like during those rehabilitation, which is more like a monster truck rally, like with the way it's set up. And we have Justin Long. He plays Dr. Alexis during that brief scene. I thought he was hilarious. And in terms of sequences, yeah, I love the House of Representatives scene, which really acts as like a big, like, pep rally in a way. And I also love, yeah, like when Joe like escapes, like that whole sequence from like the trial, from when he's in trial to when he tries to escape out of prison. And also to that brief scene with Fox News was like quite hilarious. Like I don't think like Fox News today would be shown that way, but there's facet of it that kind of rings true. And yeah, like I guess like even though like this movie shows people being dumb, yes, that could either make it or break it for you, but it also has heart to it too. Like particularly like when we see like the plants like growing, like that's when like Camacho gives Joe like the pardon, which leads to that world becoming a bit like better. And like Joe and Rita, like they become a couple and like have kids, which they say are smart, while like with Frito, like he has multiple kids that are dumb. And the post credit scene where we show Upgrade, who is Rita's pimp. Apparently, he was part of like the experiment, so he wakes up and tries to find her. Like that was kind of hilarious because he is often mentioned like off screen, like as like a threatening presence to Rita. But yeah, like once he shows up, I thought that was like a sweet cherry on top. So and also too, yeah, like performances from the actors, and I thought Luke Wilson and Maya Rudolph like they had great chemistry as like the leads of the film. And so Joe is essentially like the straight character, which Luke Wilson does a good job at, while like Rita kind of serves like as like the as like the love interest. It doesn't want to be the love interest, but I thought, yeah, like their performance together was solid. All right, now lowlights. So let's talk about the marketing. So according to Mike Judge, so the original release date for the film was August 5th, 2005. But apparently, like, the release was put on hold and they decided to delay it to September 1st, 2006. And so apparently, like, when it was time for it to be released, as scheduled. So apparently, it was only listed in 7 cities, which included like LA, Toronto, Houston, Austin, but only expanded to 130 theaters, which was not the usual wide release of the 600 or more theaters. So apparently, the Fox, they were absent in promoting the film. So they say while posters were released in theaters, um, there were no trailers, no ads, um, but there were only like 2 stills and there was no press kit, which is weird. So apparently the film was not screened for critics, and with like the lack of info from Fox led to speculation that they tried to keep the film from being seen by a large audience while fulfilling a contractual obligation for a theatrical release ahead of a DVD release. But apparently, that speculation was followed by open criticism of the studio's lack of support from various outlets. Um, but with New York Times, they mention that Fox may be shying away from the film that's about low intelligence dysgenetics because the film didn't want to offend either of its viewers or potential advertisers that are shown negatively in the film. And Idiocracy seemed to like confirm that rumor back in 2018 in an interview with GQ magazine, where he said advertisers were unhappy at the way they were shown, which led to the studio's efforts to promote the movie. Because he says, quote, "The rumor was because we used real corporations in our comedy, I mean, Starbucks was giving hand jobs. These companies gave us their name thinking they were going to get pumped up. And then we're like, welcome to Costco. We love you." Delivered a monotone. All these real corporations were like, wait a minute, wait a minute. There were a lot of people trying to back out, but it was too late. And Fox, who owned the movie, decided we're going to release this in as few theaters as possible. So it got a release in probably 3 theaters over one weekend, and it was sucked out into the vortex. So that was unfortunate. But then Mike Judge, he said in an interview in 2017 that the film's lack of marketing and wide release was a result of negative test screenings, and added that Fox subsequently decided to not give the film a strong marketing push because the distributor believed that it would develop a cult following through word of mouth and recoup its budget through home video sales, as his previous film Office Space had done that. Whoa, what an interesting story there. So obviously, like, this movie like was way ahead of its time, and it seemed like, in a way, like with the studio, they sabotaged like this movie because of the subject matter, which really is unfortunate. But it kind of seems intentional, because they didn't want any blowback, I guess, at the point. But I would imagine though, like if this movie, if it came out today, it'll be most likely be made like for streaming, probably Netflix or Amazon. Certainly not Disney, which now owns Fox. And I believe it would have performed better than when it did when it came out in 2006. I felt like if, let's say, they actually marketed this movie properly at the time, like, I don't know about it, like, being like a total flop, but I think it would have done a bit better than what it did at the time. So another low light is like with Joe, like he could have been a bit more like fleshed out as the protagonist, since he is like the straight like character. All we know like is that he is like the average, type person like with no like personality whatsoever. And yeah, we don't know much about him apart like being mentioned that like his family is dead, and that he's done well in terms of test scores and all that stuff. But I felt like there could have been more too, like with his character, even though like he's supposed to be like the average person. So maybe like he could have had either like a midlife crisis or had like trust issues since his family is dead. Like he could have been more sympathetic. And like it kind of doesn't make sense that like he gets fired but then decides to volunteer for the hibernation pod, because I mean, unless if he signed like a contract, it's like why would he do that? Maybe, or maybe at that point he feels like his life is worthless. I don't know, but still I thought like he could have been a bit more rounded as a protagonist. And I felt like in terms of like the use of the well-known corporations, I felt like it could have been experimented a bit more with the names. Like they could have just maybe like say something similar to those names, not literally using those names, or like they could have just make something up that is similar to those places. All right, let's go to trivia. So Mike Judge, he came up with the idea of the film while he was visiting Disneyland with his family, and he saw two mothers with kids in strollers, and they were fighting and cursing at each other. And he thought that it would be horrible if humanity was like this in the future. And this is kind of interesting that that particular moment served as like an inspiration for the project. So even though Fox did terrible with marketing, they licensed a Brondo drink for sale. The drink itself has gained a cult following, though it is no longer available for purchase at brondo.com. During the end credits, there's a message that states this film was also cut entirely on a computer. And for those of you that are fans of Mike Judge, he used that similar message in the end credits of his film Office Space. So, yeah, that's true, but the way that I guess is shown in the film is hilarious. And so, lastly, like, I end with the question, like, why should this movie be rediscovered? So, let's start with, should this movie be rediscovered? I say yes. Now, in terms of the why, well, because like it does a good job with the world building with 2005, and particularly with 2505 when it is primarily set. The way that it mirrors, I guess, society with the current society and the political landscape was noted too, and interesting. Like, I'm sure like at the time they didn't predict this would happen, but when it happened, like that was fascinating. And also to the performances like from the cast, I would say particularly the supporting cast. Yeah, they did a great job with those performances. So I just want to mention that with the next episode will be the after show where I will be doing like a recap of the season with my thoughts in terms of like the episodes themselves and the podcast. And I'll also be answering questions that you've submitted. So if you want your question to be answered, so you could email the podcast, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com. You could go to either Twitter or Instagram at rdmoviespod, where you would post your question in the post that is there on those platforms. Or you could leave a short voice message on Anchor, which is anchor.fm/rdmoviespod, and you would press the message button to leave your short voice message with the question you want me answered. That is a wrap on this episode of the podcast. You can submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com. Those will be read along with a recap of the season, which will air after the season finale. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at rdmoviespod for updates. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.